You're Hearing Voices, a podcast for the voiceover community. All 6 of you. We know where you live. Here's your host, Dan Hankowitz.
Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to Your Hearing Voices, a podcast for the voiceover community. My name is Dan Hankowitz. I am your host, coming to you direct from my home studio in my basement here in beautiful Springfield, Illinois. You know, my friends, I started this podcast in order to get an accurate portrayal of the world of voiceover as it exists today. All facets, folks in production, folks in e-learning, folks doing animation, and one area of voiceover which is very controversial, to say the least, is Fiverr, Fiverr.com. And with me today, joining me today is Mr. Dane Scott. He is coming to us from an undisclosed location somewhere in northern Wisconsin. Let me give a brief bio of Dane, and then we'll get to the interview. Dane's voice has been heard all over the world on major broadcast networks, syndicated television and radio programs. He has voiced thousands of corporate videos and commercials and tens of thousands of telephony projects during his voiceover career, which started in the year 1976 when Jerry Ford was occupying the White House. Mm-hmm. Dane Scott, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Well, thank you, Dan. I was almost in a state of mesmerization there from that mellifluous voice of yours. I had to kind of snap myself out of it and come to. So nice to have a chance to talk to you on your show.
Now, we don't need your exact address, but whereabouts within a 50-mile radius in northern Wisconsin are you hanging out today?
Green Bay, Wisconsin.
You're in Green Bay.
No, Green Bay area, yeah.
Oh, Green Bay area. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I take it you're a Packers fan.
If I were anything, I would be that. Yeah, probably.
Okay. Now, I mentioned, we'll get to Fiverr in a moment, but I mentioned your bio, 1976. Tell us about your interest in voiceover, how you got started, and what was sort of that first spark for you?
Well, I think probably in high school, getting involved in drama and being on the stage and being in a number of productions and directing one and doing the voice of God in my senior year for a play presentation of something called JB on the life of Job, where I was up on a big platform and I had this mask I'd hold up when I was playing the role of God and say, "Whence comest thou?" So that was probably one of the things that got me started on it. I went into college with the idea of something different and very quickly became disillusioned with that. And then sitting down with my parents, we talked about, well, what do I like? What am I interested in? And I kind of came to the conclusion that radio seemed interesting to me. And so I went to broadcast school and learned a lot there. Compared with what I was learning in college, broadcast school was just like packing the can with all kinds of really useful stuff. So I was very enthused about that and went through a year of broadcast school, during which one of the things they did was to give us the assignment at night, every night, of sitting and reading into a cassette recorder for an hour from anything we wanted, from catalogs, magazines, the Bible, encyclopedias, you name it, just reading and reading and reading. And what happens is that kind of rewrites the synapses in your brain over time, and you start to be able to do things with your voice and with the way you express yourself that you wouldn't have otherwise been doing. And I remember a time when all of a sudden it was like a little switch had flipped. When I listened back to one of my cassettes, it was like, holy smokes, what's happened here? And that was kind of the beginning of it. And then went into radio and was in radio for 20 years. And during that time, I started doing some voiceovers on the side. Ultimately, then I was making more on the side than I was in radio. And I decided it was time to jump the fence and go home and just do more of that kind of thing. So about 24 years ago, I started that. And have been doing it ever since, along with some other things, including creating a radio automation system.
Now, I'm sure there's a lot in that history that we could go into, and I really hate to kind of skip over that and get right to Fiverr, but we did promise our listeners that we would talk about Fiverr.
Mm-hmm.
And just in the interest of full disclosure, so anybody listening would know this, I do voiceover work on Fiverr. You can find me under the screen name Dan Vos, D-A-N-V-O-Z. Vos is, of course, Spanish for voice, and you can go there, check me out, listen to my demos. I just want everybody to know that I do business on Fiverr, so take that for whatever it's worth. Dane, we can't go any further in this discussion without addressing the elephant in the room. the negative opinions of Fiverr amongst many, many people in the voiceover industry. It's undercutting, it's poor quality, it's this, it's that, the world is coming to an end. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but we have to address it.
Oh, this is good.
What's
I'm glad to
sort
do
of
it.
your, when you hear those general critiques, if you want to pick one or two to respond to, I'm sure you've heard them all. How do you respond to those
They're
observations?
absolutely right. Doggone it. No, let me just back up a little bit. Back in the 1990s, when I was starting to get a little more seriously into voiceovers, while I was at the radio station one day, I was working through an agent in Milwaukee, and I got a call from the agent. They said, "We've got a 15-seconder here that we need you to do. Would you be willing to do it for $2.50?" And I thought, $2.50. I don't know. Well, at least it gets my foot in the door. I'll do it. So I said, sure. So she made the arrangements for me to travel to Milwaukee to record this. And I'm thinking, well, okay, now how does that work? She said, okay, so $250 and this and that. And I went, $250? Wow. For me back then, it was, I was doing little local stuff. It was $15, it was $25 and so on. So that was my first introduction to agency work, that actually paid some good money. Eventually, I was called down for another session. She said, I've got a couple ads for you to record. I got there and she plopped down this stack of ads the size of a medium-sized phone directory and was paying me $150 a pop for them. So I was making thousands of dollars an hour there, and it was like, wow, I kind of like this, So I've run the gamut, from very low paying to very high paying jobs. And what I've discovered is it's all the same me, whichever way I'm going. And the fact is that I just happen to really love doing voiceovers. So that is the overriding factor that makes a difference. Sometimes I'll travel to Green Bay or nearby town here and sit across the glass from the producer, and we'll look at each other. We'll shake our heads and say to each other, I can't believe we're getting paid to do this. So it's that all entered into my thinking. The fact that I'd been making some pretty good money doing voiceovers for agencies and for production houses and stuff. That when the thing about that is, if we become too exclusive and too guarded about what we'll work for and how much we'll work for, sometimes we can spend an awful lot of time auditioning, and not end up with much work. When we get the work, it pays well. But in between times, sometimes you can have some pretty big dry spells. The thing I like about Fiverr is that despite the fact that the basic pay, at least when you enter in, I mean, the $5 thing scares people, and I don't blame them. When I first came in, that also scared the heck out of me. It was like, what? That doesn't seem like it's worth the effort. But what happens is that, and when I entered in, I have to kind of circle back on this. When I first entered in on Fiverr, it was because I wanted to fill those gaps. I still get booked for things outside of Fiverr too, but there are gaps, and this filled the gaps for me. And what I discovered is that you can work your way up the ladder on Fiverr and end up making quite good money. The other day, I read 3 words for $120, for example, and that was on Fiverr. So it just kind of depends on who's hiring you, what their budget is, some other factors, how good you are, how well you've prepared yourself to be able to do voiceovers on Fiverr, how good your gig is, how well that's prepared. And those all kind of enter into it. How's that for a long answer to a short question?
It's a fine answer. If there's one common thread about voiceover, regardless of the platform, Dane, regardless of whether it's Fiverr or Upwork or Voices.com or Bodalgo or wherever, really voiceover all comes down to what people hear when they press click on your demo.
Amen.
Yes?
Yes.
So
Yep.
if you have a poor demo, if you have poor acoustics, poor anything, people are going to pick up on that, and they're not going to hire you regardless of the platform.
Mm-hmm. The creation of a good demo is a very central thing.
So let's talk a little bit more about your Fiverr journey. You talked about how you got started. So kind of take us from that beginning to where you are today, and what was that
Okay.
like, and how long did that process last, and what were some of the major hurdles that you overcame to be the golden tones you are today on Fiverr?
Yeah, that's my brand on Fiverr to explain what he's referring to there. I call myself Golden Tones because my voice tends to have kind of a smooth sound. Not a lot of harmonics. It's more smooth. So when I first started out, I took a course by someone. And in the process of taking that course, I learned a lot about it. And what I came to the conclusion of by the time got done taking this course was I could do this. It just didn't seem like something that I couldn't do. And I was looking for some new avenues and some interesting new things I could be doing. So I went ahead and set up a gig and followed some of his direction and ideas. Though I will tell you that like many of the people who will instruct on how to get on Fiverr and how to get ahead on Fiverr, it contained recommendations of little tips and tricks and workarounds and backdoors and so forth that while they didn't feel comfortable to me, he was kind of saying, look, from Fiverr's standpoint, it's okay because they are, everything you can do to generate more income is more income for them. And so I tried to kind of believe that and wound up after really building myself up pretty well on Fiverr to getting knocked off Fiverr because these things were violations. I had no idea the problem I was creating for myself. So I regrouped, started up again, this time with a lot more knowledge and with a clear conscience to say, look, I just want to play this totally by the rules. I really don't want to do workarounds and sneak arounds and doing things that are against the terms of service of Fiverr. I want to work with them and I want to be good. If I'm going to make it, I want to make it legitimately without any tricks. And so when I recreated my gig or gigs on Fiverr, I did it with everything that I had learned previously and with some thought as to what I can do toward the future to try and build up in a legitimate way what I was doing on Fiverr. So starting from that point, which would have been in September of 2018, I created a couple of gigs and I priced them the way I thought that they should be priced. And I set them up with everything that I knew to do and rose through the ranks really fast. Surprised me faster than the first time around, so that actually within 8 months, I was a top rated seller on Fiverr. And within 10 months, I'd had my first $10,000 month on Fiverr. And since then, it has continued to accelerate. We're getting onto the front page and good things are happening. And this year, by the end of the year, I'll have total sales on Fiverr of $250,000.
Dane, that is an absolutely eye-popping number. It really is. Let me ask you this question. Maybe it's too broad of a question, but what does it take to be a successful voice artist on Fiverr today?
I can take you through that. Number one, you do have to have a good demo. Number two, you need to know yourself. What are you good at? What are your qualities? What are the things that if they were looking for a voiceover person, you would do well with? And then in the setting up of your gig, there are three things especially that you need to accomplish. The first one is you have to get found. And when people are searching, they've got to find you. Those thumbnails come up on Fiverr and they show people that are offering different gigs. You have to show up. If you're on page 5, you're not going to get much work. So you've got to do what you need to in order to get found on Fiverr. So that's number one. You got to be found. The second thing is you've got to grab their eyeballs. Just as on YouTube, the thumbnails, a lot of times you'll see people doing these crazy mugging faces and stuff, these kind of oddball expressions on their face and a big question in bold text or anything that is going to be effective at catching people's eyes as they're scrolling down through that list of hits. You need to do something. It doesn't have to be something bizarre, but it can be something beautiful. I can show you some gig images I've done for some people where we've worked. It's all about the eyes. The eyes need to just really be there. But whatever you do, your gig image needs to be something that will capture people's eyes and capture their attention a little bit. So first thing is to be found. The second is to catch their eye. The third thing is to, in the case of voiceovers, grab them by the earballs. So in order to do that, if you've caught their eyes, there is a little play button in the corner of the thumbnail. If they click on that, and the first thing that comes out is something that knocks them silly, it's like, whoa, wow, this guy or this lady is really good. Now you're in a really good position. And they are likely at that point to click through to your gig, where The next thing that has to happen is that your pricing has to be commensurate with your ability. And here is where people coming in from the outside would argue that they all, the pricing on Fiverr would all be more than or less than commensurate with their ability. So pricing is lower on Fiverr as a general starting price, but you can quickly accelerate the amount that you earn through the number of gigs that you do, and also through the extras that are offered along with whatever you're doing. And the length of the script also will have a bearing on that. But the point I want to get to is after they've listened to your demo, the next thing they're going to say is, can I afford him or her? And are they going to be worth what they're asking based on their own standards and what they're used to seeing on Fiverr and so on? So again, the steps are get found, catch their eyes, grab their earballs, and then be at a good price for what you're offering.
You have a coaching service called the Gig Doctor where you walk people through that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But I want to ask you first, Dane, doing work on Fiverr, doing work off of Fiverr, throughout your years as a Fiverr seller and now as a top-rated seller, do you have a sense for why customers go to Fiverr as opposed to voices.com or as opposed to other platforms? Or as opposed to just Googling voiceover and finding the first person who comes up? Do you have a sense of that?
I would like to say that I can give you good insight on that, but I'm not sure. I think that if people are going to the platforms as opposed to going through an agency or an agent or a production house, it's probably because they'd like to spend less money than they would through an agency or a production house. So regardless of which other platform they'd go to, and some of the other platforms also have lower starting prices, than they would through an agency. That would be the first thing that I would think. And Fiverr may not be unique in that, except that their name suggests that things there are really inexpensive. And of course, you can get voiceovers for $5 on Fiverr, but it's like they always say, what you get what you pay for. And so, if you want a teenager in their parents' basement with, a little toy condenser mic and no experience, go for it. It's probably because they're on a tighter budget. There are also international buyers, people who really do want to do great work, but they're in India or they're in Pakistan or in some place where, despite all their best efforts, they won't be able to charge as much for what they're providing to their client. Therefore, they can't pay as much for the person that they hired to do their voiceover.
And not to dwell on this too much, but there are a lot of people who would say, well, if they can't afford top talent, then just walk away from those folks. But Fiverr is an opportunity to serve that market. And as you say, to do more gigs at a lower price, yes, but the volume does somewhat compensate for that.
More than compensate.
Yes.
Yes. And the other thing about that is that there are other compensations in voiceover. I find that I get a lot of pleasure out of helping people out. And so there are times when people will say, look, I'm in a situation here. And I'll just say, okay, let me just voice this and we'll just deliver it through our message. We'll just attach it to a message and send you on your way. So it doesn't have to always be about money either. Like I say, when talking with my friend across the glass, we look at each other, shake our heads and say, I can't believe people pay us to do this. So for me, voiceovers are fun. I could do them all day long. And let's say, for example, you are in a range of, say, $25 to $40 for a voiceover, and that's for starting like 100-word script. And then from there, maybe their script is 400 words or 600 words or whatever. So you're going to be in the range of $70, $80, whatever it is, to do the voiceover. Now, granted, that's not a lot when you look at the open market, but if you've got 4 of those to do in an hour, that's $280 an hour. I can live with that. I can live with that all day long.
That's definitely a livable wage, no doubt about that. There's another question I want to ask you, and I promise we will get to Gig Doctor, but one more question I want to ask, kind of a general VO question. I am 46 years of age. I'm not going to convince anybody that I'm a youngster. There seems to be a great demand for millennial voices. It's the voice that I refer to as the 35-year-old ex-frat guy, the guy you went to college with, the guy he was a cut-up, he drank a lot, he did whatever in college, but now he's settled down, he's got 2 kids, and he kind of sounds average, he kind of sounds normal, he sounds like a guy That voice, people are just dying to get that voice. You and I don't have that voice. So for older, folks, for older people who are getting into the voiceover industry, what kind of work is out there for
Fear
folks? Fear not. Please, Dane, help us allay our fears. What kind of work is out there for folks north of 40, north of 50, etc.?
There are an awful lot of older people on Fiverr. There are awful lot of people on Fiverr, period. Right now there are, I think, like 19,000 voiceover people on Fiverr. But that doesn't mean that you can't come up through the ranks. If I do a search just for the two words voiceover, right now I'm showing up on page 1. So it can be done. But the other thing to say about that is that people are looking for all different kinds of voices. And people that are on Fiverr are a little less likely to have agency mindset. Agency mindset says, I need someone that sounds 25, that sounds hip, that sounds millennial, that sound like you were describing, that some kind of a sweet spot there where you sound like a young adult. And I think that what you find on Fiverr, people are looking for quality more than age. This has been my experience. If they hear someone that can deliver their script with great interpretation and inflection and feeling and meaning and conversationality, those things I think can make a bigger impact, or they have more impact on Fiverr, I think. And so as an older person, I would not be afraid at all of that. I don't think that that's going to be so much of an issue on Fiverr.
Okay, Dane, so if you would please put on your gig doctor white coat and your stethoscope and tell us about your gig doctor coaching service and what that's all about.
Well, this is something I started this year, and despite the fact that I was doing well on Fiverr, there was a certain part of me that said, who are you to tell other people how to do what they should do? And so I came to kind of a point where I thought, there was something in me. I love to teach. Let's start with that. I've always enjoyed teaching and education and even doing e-learning scripts. But I didn't feel like I almost felt like I was being presumptuous to set myself out there as being some kind of an expert. What I did was, in one of my Fiverr groups, I said, look, I'm going to create a lab rat just to kind of prove my theories and see if they're true. So I created a brand new gig, and I did everything that I knew to do to try and make that one successful. Before long, I had that one on the first page of Fiverr, and it was starting to get some really nice sales. So at that point, I thought to myself, okay, this is reproducible. It's not just me. And so I started to introduce the idea of the gig doctor through a website, and also just letting people know that I was doing this in the groups and so forth. And people started to come on board with me on it. And then I started getting some really nice comments in the Facebook groups, just testimonial things. And that's encouraged me to do more of it, to the point now where I think I've done about 60 gig doctors this year. And they're just such fun sessions. We get together through Skype, like you and I are doing right now. We do a screen share so that I can look at their gig with them. And then I just they take them through every single part of their gig and talk about what we can do to optimize it to be found, how we can brand it to represent the best of, if it were Dan, to brand Dan in some way that makes him accessible and represents in the minds of the buyers what it would be like to work with Dan and what kind of product he would provide to them. And that includes then, in some cases, as a side thing, creating a gig image. But the main things are to optimize the gig in all of its aspects to be found, and that the demo, because most of the people that have contacted me have all been voiceover people, just has turned out that way, that the gig's demo is an ear grabber, and that it's a kind of a package deal. Everything needs to kind of be in the right place in order to really start to flower on Fiverr. And so that's what we do. And it takes about an hour. Sometimes we go over. If we go over, it's no big deal. I'm just happy it's fun. It's like doing voiceovers. I love doing it, and I do it all day long. So that's how a gig doctor session works. And it's over at thegigdoctor.com if anybody wants to have a look at it.
Thegigdoctor.com.
Thegigdoctor.com. Yeah.
Now, of course, Dane, being a doctor, sometimes you have to deliver fatal news. Do you ever have situations where you consult with someone and your medical ethics compel you to tell that person, I'm sorry, you're just not ready for this? Does that ever happen?
I am really fortunate in that regard, because that's a very painful thing to have to do, that I have not had to do that much. Most of the people that have contacted me have got real potential. honestly good potential. So, a lot of them are older people. They've got experience. And in the cases of where I see the potential, but they're just not quite there yet, we can still put that gig out there and then be working in the background to improve their product. So that's where the coaching comes in.
Dane, let me ask you one question that's gotten some traction in the various discussion groups and Facebook groups pertaining to Fiverr is the question of advertising your gig off of Fiverr. Good idea, yes or no?
Oh, okay. Well, I can see where that's going because, and it depends on what your persona is on Fiverr. I've seen people that, there's a guy with a beard and all you see is his nose down to his chin. They've got a picture of that much and then he goes by an alias on there. So what he's trying to do is to keep people who hire him outside of Fiverr from knowing who he is or the fact that he's selling on Fiverr. And there's a whole almost a religious thing that says, that if people at agencies or whatever found out that you were on Fiverr, that would be the end of your work through those agencies. I'm not so sure that that's true. I think it could be more fear than anything. But in my own case, I'm doing so well on Fiverr. I don't mind that people know that I'm Dane Scott. And when it comes to promoting it outside, I have no hesitation about doing that. So I have Facebook pages, actually a separate Facebook page for every gig that I offer to kind of funnel people in, channel people in, and links all really help. There's something on Fiverr called social proof that is an important aspect of Fiverr's recognizing your viability and promoting you in search. So if people come in from the outside via these shared links that Fiverr can supply you with, Fiverr counts it as merit toward your reputation on Fiverr with them. And I think that can help you in the search results as well.
Let's get a little bit into the weeds of the Fiverr platform. Can you walk us through impressions, views, clicks, what all that means when a Fiverr seller is analyzing his or her statistics? Help us understand those metrics.
Yeah, well, when we were talking before about the fact that step one is to get found, that's an impression. So if you were to go to Fiverr as a buyer, by the way, that's the term that they use. For everyone who's purchasing services, it's a buyer. And for everyone who's offering services, they call it a seller. It just keeps it nice and simple. So you go to the search box there on Fiverr and you do a search for voiceover, okay? And then some results come up. Now, in each of these thumbnails, then, once the results come up and you see those thumbnails there, every thumbnail that you've seen is an impression for that person. So if they show up in your search, they've just gotten an impression, or to say it another way, the buyer has just gotten an impression of that seller because they've seen them come up in the search. So every time you come up in a search that's visible by the buyer, that's an impression. Now, let's say that I listen to Dan's demo and I think, yeah, I can dig that. So then I click on his gig image there and it takes me to his gig. That's a click. So that's the difference between an impression and a click. One is just a sighting and the second is an action. And then obviously the next thing is a purchase, and that explains itself.
Obviously, it's in Fiverr's best interest that people click and they buy. They don't make money until people buy a product. If you go too long without making a sale, it stands to reason that sooner or later that gig will be confined to the ash heap of obscurity.
Relegated to the backwaters of obscurity.
Yeah. And then once that happens, there's really nothing more you can do for that. That gig is.
Oh no, I don't think that's necessarily true. Okay. I think that you can get a gig active again. I think you can blow breath into it again and get it going. But you just would need to stir up the fires, to make some changes to the gig so Fiverr's noticing that it's active. If you can pick up a couple of orders and you can start to kind of build it back up again.
Let me kind of circle back to a question about rates. Anthony Pica told a story about, and you may have heard the story, he told a story about a buyer who contacted him off of Fiverr, inquired about a project. He offered a quote. For whatever reason, they didn't do the gig off of Fiverr. And then later on, the buyer found him on Fiverr and said, hey, wait a minute, you're charging, X percentage less on Fiverr. What are you trying to pull here? So I want to ask about, doing work on Fiverr versus doing work off Fiverr. You have your own website. You do work on Fiverr. I have my own website. I do work on Fiverr. I charge more off of Fiverr because I'm assuming the risk. I have to do the marketing. I have to stand the website. I have to chase down the billing. If somebody finds me via my own marketing or via SEO, that's something that comes about as a result of me making a financial investment. What is your philosophy regarding?
Pretty much yours.
Okay.
Pretty much yours, Dan. I feel the same way. Fiverr's doing an awful lot. They take 20%. But my gosh, they're, like you said, they're doing the marketing. They're marketing us not only within the platform, but they're also marketing us out of the platform through Google search. They run ads in social media. They do a lot. And then they essentially bring buyers to your doorstep. And then suddenly you're contacted. The people have already heard your demo. In a lot of cases, they don't even want an audition. I would say in most cases, they're already sold on you or they're not. So there's almost no auditioning either, which is another big thing. If you have to audition to make that higher priced gig, how much more work have you done? How much time are you spending per order that you get in order to get that higher priced order? And I think it all kind of evens out. As a matter of fact, in my own case, I think I'm doing better on Fiverr than I would do if I were not on Fiverr. If I were just trying to do direct marketing of myself to individual agents and so on, because that's getting to be a harder and harder road to hoe. So, in defense of both sides, I've been on both sides, so I totally get the arguments both ways. And I would not encourage people to get onto Fiverr if they're happy with what they're doing now. But in my own case, it has worked out well.
Last question for you, Dane. You've been very gracious with your time, and I can't thank you enough. Voiceover is an ever-changing, ever-evolving industry as a whole. Where do you see Fiverr going 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Is it just going to continue to get more, in terms of voiceover, we'll look at the voiceover aspect. Is it going to get more saturated, tougher to do business, tougher to get those gig doctor gigs to the front page? Where do you see things going?
I would like to say that it's going to stay about how it is, but I suspect that it will continue to grow in popularity for booking voiceovers. And of course, for everyone who's already on there, that means that there's going to be more competition. And so we have to just be prepared for that possibility.
So Dane, this question it comes from me. It's something that's been bouncing around in my head for some time, as the work has been kind of sporadic. It's been hit and miss. I'm nowhere near the numbers, the success that you've had. My question is kind of theoretical in nature. In voiceover, is it possible to have a good voice, to be talented, to have been coached, to have a good demo, to have great marketing chops, and with all of that, to just find yourself outside of what the market wants right now? You've done everything right. You put it out there, but they just ain't buying it. Is that
you got the wrong bait on the hook or something? Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's possible. But frankly, the more things you are doing right, the less likely that is to happen. And if you are finding that yourself in that situation, I would say the first place to look is at your demo. Take a look at, I'll tell you one thing that can be really helpful. And this is kind of universally helpful across the board on Fiverr. Do some searches, find out who's coming up near the top of the searches, visit their pages, listen to their demos, and see what's going on. And I think that you'll find out a lot that way. Get down and dirty with the data. The more you investigate who's successful and why they're successful, the better chance you'll have to be successful as well.
Get down and dirty with the data and get with the doctor. Dane Scott from the greater Green Bay area, thank you so much for coming on. Before we wrap, would you please give us your contact info for the people who might want to hire you either for the gig doctor services or for your voiceover services?
Okay. All right. Well, it's, first of all, thegigdoctor.com is the website. And there is a whole page there on just the gig checkup, which is what we call it. And so I'd suggest you check that out for sure. Then when it comes to coaching, which is something that I do quite a bit of, and I've been in voiceover for 45 years or so now. So I've got quite a bit that I can offer in that area. And I've done quite a bit of network work as well. So I've got some creds when it comes to doing voiceovers myself, and I'm pretty good as a teacher. If you are interested in being coached, you can go to Facebook and just type in voiceover coaching, voiceover being one word, coaching. And I should come right up there that you'll see an image that says the coach. And then feel free to check out what's there and to contact me if you would like. And I would love to work with anybody that feels like I'd be able to be of use to them.
He is thegigdoctor.com. If you want to check out his Fiverr gig consulting services, he is Golden Tones on Fiverr. Dane Scott, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, sir.
No, it was really fun. It was nice to meet you, Dan.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you very much, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you for listening to Your Hearing Voices. Please don't share this podcast with anybody and forget about subscribing. We've already reached 8 subscribers and that's enough. We're not saving the whales here, people. Thanks again for listening and know that Dan pretends to appreciate it very much. Bye for now.